Hello, everybody, and welcome to this webinar where we will introduce to you all the inquiry draft of the PEFC Project Sourcing Standard and the inquiry draft of the certification body requirements standard that goes with the project sourcing. The webinar is being recorded, and we will share with all the participants the recording after the session. At the end of the presentation, there will be time for a Q&A, and we will go through your questions. You can raise your questions using the Q&A functionality underneath on the tab underneath in Zoom. Now, what's this project sourcing? It builds on the existing approach for PEFC for project certification. The idea is to enable project teams to demonstrate the sustainable sourcing of the materials. It strengthens traceability and responsible sourcing across global supply chains and ensures that certified forest and tree-based materials can be tracked from the forest to the final project with confidence. Getting now into the project sourcing standard as such, let's discuss how did we get there? How did we start? What it is? What is it? Historically, project certification was an application of chain of custody to one-off-time projects, and such projects traditionally were buildings, structures, or fit-outs. It's a mechanism to demonstrate that for a specific project, the forest and tree-based material is sourced responsible, and there is traceability that these materials come either from certified forest or controlled sources and controlled sources. In some cases, side note, also recycled material, but recycled material within the PEFC supply chain for the traceability is treated as certified material. If we compare now with chain of custody and sustainable forest management certification will be at the source where we are sourcing the materials. And the chain of custody provides the traceability from the forest to the project. So that's the supply chain traceability. Once we get to the project itself, it's a framework, a chain of custody framework that is applied at the project level to demonstrate that certified supply chains are delivering to the built environment from sustainable forest and tree-based materials. And it enables the traceability when within a project we have different project members involved and the chain of custody is broken because many of those project members are procuring materials for the project, but they are not PEFC chain of custody certified. They may be or they may not be. Currently, the requirements that PEFC has in place for project certifications build up over the current chain of custody standard and an appendix and annex to the guidance 2001, the chain of custody guidance that dates from 2014. Here are some statistics on how many PEFC project certifications are there. All in all, there are 60 plus projects issued in 10 different countries and issued by 18 certification bodies. The top country numbers of PEFC project certificates is Japan with 32, followed by Austria with 7 and Singapore with 6. And there are some others in France, Spain, Australia, Italy, UK, Denmark, or Netherlands. The first PEFC project certificate was issued in Spain during the expo that happened in Zaragoza, and I need to say I cannot avoid to refer to this one with a smile in my face because I come from Zaragoza. This is where project certification started in 2008. In 2012, during the Olympic Games celebrated in London, we got our first dual project certification. 2015, PEFC issued a specific guidance in the need of chain of custody does not 100% apply word by word for projects. Let's give a specific guidance. In 2020, we revised the chain of custody, and in 2022, we revised the guidance document. Since 2022, the chain of custody working group reaffirmed the need that we need specific requirements for project certification, and that's how we got here, that we are revising the project certification, and it has resulted into a separate standard that is currently in consultation. For the development process, the revision process for the project certification standards is following the technical procedures at PEFC to develop and revise technical documentation, so standards, and it includes the establishment of a task force, the preparation of different working drafts until the task force or the working group reaches consensus on an inquiry draft, and then we launch a consultation. This is where we are at. For this specific project, the chain of custody working group, which is a technical group at PEFC, a permanent technical group that is responding to needs of clarifications within the chain of custody standard, decided to establish a separate task force for project certification with experts from the building environment. And both the task force and the chain of custody working group has worked on the drafts and reached consensus on an inquiry draft after 7 different drafts developed. Lots of discussions, lots of dedication from our task force members, and this is what brought us here to this public consultation, where we would really like you to take part and give us your feedback. During the revision process, some challenges, some opportunities that the task force identified. Currently, there is limited market recognition and adoption for PEFC project certification. Some of you may don't even know that PEFC offers this. There is some complexity on the certification requirements, and there is some inconsistencies between the 2014 version of the guidance that includes these specific clarifications for project certification and the current chain of custody. Also, we miss specific requirements for certification bodies certifying projects. Currently, you auditors that are already familiar, what you are doing is implementing Standard 2003, service requirements for chain of custody. In the current approach, there is also a lack of alignment with green building frameworks and with construction terminology. And all this brought the task force to, first of all, consider what's the difference between project certification and chain of custody, and what do we need to do to set up requirements that have a market value and promote sustainable forest management. How do we get there? What are the steps? PEFC's bottom-up approach is at the core of this development, as any other development, and we go through informed and state-wise approach. First of all, engaging with certification bodies, getting to know those that have already conducted project certification audits, what worked, what didn't work, challenges that I mentioned always become opportunities. It means that we can improve. We conducted a market survey and research on the need, what it's needed. For example, here, one of the clear feedbacks is it needs to get a bit closer to the building environment language. We have also investigated some green building certifications such as LEED, RIAM, DGNV, CASB, Nordic Swan, Green Star, and some other green building frameworks. We have consulted with ISO experts, construction experts, even carbon experts, and we also visit some sites, some current project certifications that are ongoing. What's coming next? So once we go to the public consultation state, and the steps that we are following are our PEFC technical documentation development. We are conducting these public webinars to promote the consultation and to explain a little bit the key aspects of the standards in order to make it easier for you to comment. We will conduct pilot projects to test the current inquiry drafts. Once the consultation is finished, once the pilot projects are finished, we, through the task force, when I say we, I mean the project certification task force and the chain of custody working group, will go through those comments, we'll go through the results of the pilot projects, and we'll respond to those. until they achieve consensus on a final draft, until our project certification experts feel comfortable with the requirements. Then from the task force, it will go to the chain of custody working group that, if fine with the text, will bring it to the PEFC International Board of Directors, that, if happy with the text, will recommend to the General Assembly for approval. The consultation currently is open until the 23rd of December. There is an online form that you need to fill in that brings you to the links and instructions to access the drafts. The access to the drafts is through this form. Once you get to the document, it's very easy to comment because it's just the regular comment functionality through Microsoft Word. You will have an online version and you will make your comments directly. There is also full transparency because you can see the comments made by other commenters. We really encourage you to help you with this one. You will see that I repeat this several times within the webinar because for us, it's critical that we get feedback on our standards to know whether they are making sense for you that will be implementing those. And the task force and the chain of custody working group will review every comment that we received. Every comment will be carefully looked at and given a response. Okay. Now, let's talk about the benefits of PEFC project sourcing. What's the added value? First of all, is that it supports the transition to low carbon renewable materials. As you know, the construction sector and different procurement policies, they are increasingly focused on lowering the carbon, the embodied carbon, and choosing renewable materials in order to lower this embodied carbon within the materials. And here PEFC has a key role to play, and not only PEFC, but all the certificate holders that are producing PEFC certified products that are coming from sustainable managed forests, they are key on the solution to be provided for this long-term carbon storage and to support the circular design within the building environment. It also helps providing a framework at project level to ensure responsible sourcing and traceability. It gives clear requirements on the setting up of a management system that will maintain the process with a specific process for the procurement, the verification, and the traceability of any forest and tree-based materials that are going to be part of the project. And this is to be implemented and has been designed to adapt to simple processes, but also to very complex construction supply chains. The task force has also looked carefully to other green building certification frameworks and aligned our standard as much as possible with what companies behind the building of the different projects are going to have to comply with. So it supports compliance with due diligence and disclosure obligations on material origin, and it directly aligns with leading green building certification frameworks, such as some of those that you see on the screen. Those are not all, generally. LEED, BREEAM, Green Star, CASB, DGNV, etc. A key element. I mentioned earlier that one of the key difference between chain of custody and project certification is that within a project, you can have many different entities, independently legal entities that are sourcing, procuring for the project. For those that are not PEFC chain of custody certified, and some of them, they don't really are under the scope of chain of custody. They are not chain of custody certified. The traceability is broken. This is where project certification jumps in and enables this traceability through the project member concept. In addition to that, another key benefit, and I will enter into a bit more detail during the technical slides that are coming next, it's the scalability for multi-project and SME participation, because this new standard allows organizations to implement a management system that is going to apply certification across multiple projects on an ongoing basis. And we have the multi-project constantly with different projects and organizations running those. And this organization running the multi-projects may be a multi-site organization, but may also be different types of SMEs that operate under a central office that is managing the certificate, which is a key support for medium and small enterprises. Here, just to give you the definition, what you have seen on the screen, we have copy-pasted the definition from the inquiry draft. What's a project? But in fact, I think that better than reading you what says the text, let's go to the next slide, where you can see examples of projects. On the left side of the screen, you see the rebuilding of the entire roof structure of Notre Dame de Paris Cathedral, that it's a PEFC certified project in solid oak. This is a current project. On the right side, you see where do we go from here? And you see many chairs. Those chairs are the chairs of the Notre Dame de Paris, 1,500 PEFC certified chairs. We also have mobile projects, another case of success in Japan with the Austrian pavilion. Great collaboration between our colleagues and from the offices in Austria and our colleagues from the PEFC offices in Japan that made this happen. A PEFC certified project, which was the Austrian pavilion. Quite an original one, as you can see, the design. And where we can get. With the new project certification requirements, we have a variety of scopes and applications. We are no longer talking only about a building. We are talking about projects in the wider sense of the concept. So we can see a playground, kindergarten, a skyscraper, an airport, plenty of a hiking path, plenty of examples, a roller coaster, plenty of examples where forest and tree-based material is used, and we can help those project leaders that want to source sustainably, that are caring about our forests, to show how they are caring and to put requirements in place through a management system to prove that they are sourcing from sustainable resources. Getting now through a bit more technical details, not too much, just a little bit. How does it all work? What is the content of this inquiry draft? To start with, to be considered that it's based on chain of custody, and the development has been conducted looking at the chain of custody standard, same structure, and focusing on those parts that are different. Two big contextual differences. What project sourcing is doing is extending the assurance of chain of custody to the complexity of the construction environments, where we have projects that are lengthy, multi-layered, involve numerous contractors and suppliers, and as I already mentioned earlier, different project members, different suppliers with different and separate procurement responsibilities. In addition to that, as part of chain of custody, and most of you are already familiar, within chain of custody, it's not allowed for a product to be broken up into individual components when it comes to a claim. You need to claim the project, the product itself. However, because of the different nature of projects, project sourcing certification allows specific project components or scopes. So for example, in a building shell or core or structural system or fit out to be certified independently. Also because different project members are going to have different responsibilities. Maybe I'm taking care of, my enterprise is taking care of the roof, but I have no clue about the flooring. So I will be able to get PEFC project certified for the roof that is sourced from sustainable forest management and tree-based materials. But as I don't have responsibility over the flooring, I may not. However, it may be that there is another contractor that is in charge of the full project that wants the scope to be the full project. That it's also possible. There are two types of project certificates, and that's one of the key differences with regard to the previous version, the current version. It's that for this inquiry draft, The inquiry draft allows single project, one of project certification for one single project, the existing approach, but also multi-projects. So if my organization is dedicated to build projects continuously, I can get this multi-project certification and have a regular certificate within the certification cycle of 5 years for my multiple projects under the same management system, specifically adapted for each of the projects, of course. We have 3 types of certificate holders. We can have single site project certification, so one single organization managing one project or a multi-project certificate. We can have multi-site project certification, one single organization that is composed by different organizations within different participants, or what we call SME group project certification, which is entitled for small and medium enterprises. They are independently legally, but they get together under the management of a central office that will maintain the management system, and they will adapt, of course. With regards to project members, the standard recognizes both PEFC certified and non-certified project members. There are stricter requirements for non-certified project members because, of course, if they are not chain of custody certified, it's through the project management system that they are going to ensure traceability and responsible sourcing. The standard defines clear roles and responsibilities within the management system. The full chapter defines who is doing what they have to do, etc. Project members are going to be able to do procurement, and within the project, they will need to ensure traceability of the certification claims, and they will need to coordinate with the organization because everything that is going to go into a PEFC certified project that may not be PEFC certified must come from control sources. So it must not come from controversial sources, and to make sure that this happens, the material will need to go through the due diligence system. They will have to control also the risk of mixing, so avoid completely the risk of mixing to ensure this traceability. And they will need to reflect real supply chain structure and realities for the different tiered contracting models. Traceability, linking directly with the claims and methods. The claims can be made at component, installed component, or at project level. The methods may be applied at installed component or at project level. This allows a greater flexibility, and we realized that this was one during the market survey. This is one of the needs. They need clear flexibility to enable to make claims about the different installed components. There are also 2 key concepts, which are applicant projects and finished project. What's an applicant project? And project stays or maintains the status of applicant until it's finalized. When it's finalized, it gets to finished project. And this difference is key because right now, the current project certification requirements do not consider this difference. So organizations that are certified for project certification cannot really promote their certification until the project is finished. This is what happens with the chain of custody, that until your product is not finished, you cannot claim that your product is finished. This is a challenge for the building environment and for the project's environment because oftentimes they have a longer duration than chain of custody. For example, we currently have one that probably it's foreseen that will last 10 years. If you get certified today for your project, it's the HMC Victory in the UK, a great project happening right now. So if you get certified today and you cannot communicate about your project until it's finished in 10 years, it's a long process and it's not very fair because you have a management system in place and you are making sure that you are complying with the requirements and you are sourcing responsible. That's why we came up with this applicant project versus the finished project. There are 2 main chain of custody methods, percentage method and physical separation. credit method is not allowed for projects. And the methods can be applied the same as the claims. It's either at project level or at install component level. So you could have a project for which you use a percentage method and another install component for which you may use something else. And two key concepts, you have minor components, and on the next slide, we can also see temporary components. There was a lot of discussion within the working group with those small components that sometimes are part of, many times are part of the projects. It's up to the organization to decide whether temporary components or, I forgot the term, sorry. Minor components, I got a blackout, apologies. So whether minor or temporary components, the organization can decide whether to include them under the scope or not. In any case, they must come from legal sources. And now we are going to start to discuss the CV's requirements. Many of you are auditors or accreditation bodies, so we would like to also to introduce to you the specific requirements that you will have to implement when conducting audits against the standard. The structure, exactly the same as the 2003, which at the same time is the same as in 17065. When the requirements for project sourcing are the same as for the chain of custody, we don't refer to those, we don't copy paste, we'll just make the reference. We have add, so what the project sourcing requirements standard does is that it adds specific interpretations where there are specific requirements for the project sourcing environment. And there is an additional appendix comparing to the chain of custody with specific requirements to conduct sampling under multi-projects. Some chapters with key changes: resource requirements, process requirements, notification, accreditation, sampling within multi-projects, and multi-sites and SMEs. We are going now in detail through some of the key changes. How many ways to become a project sourcing auditor? First one, being a chain of custody auditor. Second way is qualified according to the first qualification for an auditor under the chain of custody standard, the 2003, the standard with requirements for certification bodies. And there is an innovation in the project sourcing. I mentioned earlier that a big work of the task force was to look into existing green building frameworks and approach those and building up synergies and see how we can bring added value. This is one of the points where we identified this is a way where we can, on the one hand, recognize the great job done by the green building qualified assessors and at the same time bring them to the supply chain, to the chain of custody and increase the number of auditors. So being a green building qualified assessor plus getting trained on ISO 19011 audit techniques and some knowledge and skills as a chain of custody auditor, it's also another way to become an auditor for the project sourcing requirements. Here you see what's a green building assessor: a person with a recognized qualification from a green building rating organization authorized to evaluate and verify a building's compliance with the criteria of the applicable green building framework. Here are the three ways. And now you are going to see, in addition to that, what they need to get. Whatever way you go through is a specific training on project sourcing. And PEFC will develop a specific training framework to enable this training to happen. Moving on now to the process requirements, starting by the application. The information to be obtained from the client, it's similar as for chain of custody, some specifications. For single project, the specific project duration, the list of project members, roles and responsibilities, and a key point is whether those project members are conducting off-site work. I will come back to this one later. And description of the project scope. This information doesn't need to be obtained at the moment of the first contact, but it needs to be obtained before entering into the relationship in order to assess the type of project and the resources needed. Within the application review, what the task force has done is bringing it in alignment with the standard 1004. And if you don't know, sorry, here getting too technical, apologies for this. Standard 1004 is a standard that PEFC approved in 2024 with requirements for certification bodies providing sustainable forest management certification. So some points and requirements on this standard are not yet covered by the standard for certification bodies for chain of custody currently. The task force identified a few that were relevant and added to this one. Concretely, it's about CVs identifying engagement from organizations in corrupt practices, and also some requirements on transfer of certificates between certification bodies. Continuing with process requirements, now we are entering into the evaluation that shall be conducted through a risk-based approach. The standard also provides some details on remote audits, when can auditors, conduct the audit remotely using ICT. And there is a specific chapter. Also, the task force look at the standard 1004 for this chapter wherever there was something that was making sense. Another key point under the evaluation, the certification body will have to determine whether on-site audit of project members conducting work off-site is needed or not. I mentioned earlier that under the application, the certification body will have to receive information from the organization whether project members also conduct off-site work. If those project members are not PEFC chain of custody certified, then the certification body will have to assess whether an on-site audit of the premises of the non-PEFC chain of custody certified project member is needed. There are also requirements to determine audit time and to determine sampling. On the certification decision side of things, before initial certification, all the non-conformities shall be closed. For multi-projects, if a non-conformity is identified, the certification body shall examine the impact and assess whether the non-conformity affects a specific project within the multi-projects that may have 1, 2, 3, 4, well, for sure more than 1, 2, 3, 4, 20 projects. So whether the non-conformity only affects one project or on the contrary, the non-conformity may affect the management of the projects. In such a case, the non-conformity shall be raised at project level. Certification documentation. Until a project is finished, the project shall be referred as applicant project. And this is the way to reflect it as well under the certificate. For multi-projects, projects may be added within audits. So projects do not need to be added only during the regular certification audit cycle. They can be audited in between. The auditor will have to assess whether an additional audit is needed or whether it's not. The certificate number, it's aligned with the chain of custody certificate number and with the sustainable forest management certificate number. As if you are familiar with the PEFC certificate numbers requirements, we are replacing chain of custody by PRJ as project. And just a side note, lots of discussions at task force level regarding the abbreviation that we should use. We were considering PRO as project. Finally, the consensus was around PRJ. Looking forward to hearing your feedback in the consultation, whether you consider that this one is appropriate. Certificate duration. For single projects, the duration is 1 year, renewed in an annual basis. That's what the task force is proposing. For multi-projects, regular 5-year certification cycle and certificate duration as for chain of custody. Surveillance audits. For single projects that last less than 15 months, they shall go through initial audit and final audit, no matter the duration of the project. For multi-projects, same as chain of custody. Initial audit, surveillance audit, at least 4 until the recertification audit that shall happen no later than 5 years after the initial audit. With regards to Appendix 1 and 2, Appendix 1 refers to the notification, and the idea is to maintain the same notification requirements as for chain of custody, so that certification bodies will not need additional notification. Within the accreditation, it's under consideration. Right now, the draft says that certification bodies shall extend the accreditation scope to cover project sourcing. In any case, what PFC has in mind is to enable a long transition period for the accreditation requirements. So for the specific accreditation requirements, long transition period in order to enable certification bodies to work out what's the demand for project certification, when are they gonna start, and being able to start working with the requirements before they must get accredited. Sampling for multi-projects. This is the summary table that is included within the inquiry draft. For initial audit, the sample size is the square root of the number of projects. For surveillance audit, the sample can be reduced by 6, so multiply by 0.6 to reduce the sample for ongoing projects. For projects that finish since the last audit and did not get an external certification body audit, they shall go through the auditor will have to determine 2 categories. And for those projects that have finished and never got an audit, they are a specific category and the square root of the number of those projects applies. For recertification audit for ongoing projects, the square root of the number of projects. And if the management system has proven to be effective over the certification cycle, it can be reduced by a 0.8 factor. For projects that finished since the last audit and never got an audit, we maintain the square root of the number of projects. So as you can see, the certification body, the auditor will need to determine the sample split into 2. One sample for ongoing projects, another one for projects that have finished and never got an audit. This was the way proposed by the task force to make sure that there is a specific attention for those projects that may have never gone through external audit within the certification cycle. To finish with, Appendix 4 has specific requirements for multi-site and SME group. They are based on the chain of custody standard. There are only specifications that apply at project level. There are specific definitions and very similar approach. Maybe to highlight here that this standard is really talking about SME groups as something different from multi-sites, whereas the current chain of custody standard has both under multi-site, and it's multi-site type and multi-site producer group. Here we have 2 different types of certificate holders differentiated, multi-site and SME group. And this is the end of our introduction to these 2 standards. I hope this was helpful. We will jump on to the Q&A. There is a question: will a project remain an applicant project until the final audit has been completed if the certification cycle is 5 years? In fact, the way I understand the question is for multi-projects. Well, in fact, I can answer this from both perspectives. For single project, the certification cycle may not be 5 years. The certification cycle is lower, so the project will remain as an applicant project until the end, until it's finalized, and then it becomes, after the final audit, a finished project. For multi-projects, this will depend on the status of the project within the 5-year cycle. If the project is finished in the 3rd year, after the surveillance audit, when this project has been the object of this sampling, where you have seen that we distinguish between ongoing projects and finished project, once the project is finished after this surveillance audit, the project can be considered as a finished project and no longer as an applicant project. I see another question with regards to the differences between PFC certified project members and non-PFC certified project members. Here, a key differentiation between both, it's that a PFC certified project member has a chain of custody in place, has an annual audit for their PFC certified processes, which means that an external auditor is coming, they have a management system in place, they are familiar, they are already sourcing responsibly, they are already ensuring the traceability, they have internal audits, they have external audits, the management system. Non-PSC certified project members don't have such a management system in place. So the support is going to come from the organization that is the one that will ensure that they maintain the traceability and that will take care that the claims are passed on. That's why the requirements are different. In addition to that, the standard allows off-site work for non-certified project members. However, the auditor will have to assess whether the non-certified project members require an additional audit, on-site audit from the certification body. And of course, this will have an impact on the corresponding fees of the audit if this is needed. I see another question related to the training framework. And PFC will develop a specific training framework for project sourcing. I already mentioned that a requirement of getting trained on project sourcing will be put in place. Most probably, this will be a live training. I don't know if you are familiar with the current training framework that PLC put in place for the Renewable Energy Directive. It's a live training that auditors can take at their own path, and they pass the knowledge test, they take the knowledge test, then they pass and they obtain a certificate, but the training is not live. It's at their own path, online training. Probably it will be a similar approach because it's built up over chain of custody and it's quite similar. What we'll have is Q&A sessions, live sessions. I see a question whether the training will be only in English. If our national governing bodies or the PFC offices are happy to translate, we will make sure that the training is translated into other languages. The knowledge test most probably will have to be in English, that it's difficult to translate. But of course, these are open questions to be discussed. Will companies have to, reading another question, will companies have to inform their certification body when they add new projects between surveillance audits? Yes, they will. And the certification body will have to assess the projects to accept that they are added or not. So if a project is too complex and it has nothing related to the existing management system, maybe the auditor considers that an additional audit is needed before the project is added. Also, usually they will assess, but they will need to inform. Yes, indeed. Another question, can an organization apply for project certification for temporary components only? To be honest, that's a very good question. And I would say that the current inquiry draft doesn't have any requirements against this. Your project could be the temporary components of your project indeed. That could be. And there may be some potential for companies that are specifically working on temporary components. One of the discussions at chain of custody working group level was how to ensure that temporary components are also sustainably sourced, but sometimes they are outside of the scope of the organization managing the project, etc. That's why the task force and the working group came up with this requirement of they must be legally sourced. If they are not included under the scope, at least they must be legally sourced. Under the current requirements, it could be a specific project. So the specific project temporary components. So yes. I don't see any other question. If you don't have any questions now, no worries, you can come back to us later on. You can always contact us by email at standards@pfc.org. Any questions you may have, we are happy to take those questions. If we don't have the answer, we will find someone that can provide answers, or we will find the answer internally and provide you with the answer. Some key takeaways. Why are we so excited? I'm excited by nature, but you can see I'm quite excited with this project sourcing standard because we believe we are providing greater flexibility and clarity. We are trying to provide a stronger traceability and transparency and develop something that makes sense at project level, that supports the building environment and generally any project. It's more inclusive and accessible certification. Certification can be quite a burden for the smaller ones, and from the beginning, the task force and the chain of custody working group have considered them as PFC tasks through the producer group requirements. There are new opportunities for auditing and making sure that responsible source forest and tree-based materials are used and are key in the building environment market. And here, a quote, "Together we are making sustainable construction simpler, clearer, and more impactful." The quote comes from my colleague Hannah. I'm just taking her words here. Take part in the consultation. Please help us. Go to the link, go to the consultation and give us your comments because we need you. It's the only way that the task force and the working group are gonna know whether what they are putting in place makes sense or doesn't make sense. And with this, we conclude here. Don't hesitate to contact us if you have any questions. We are available at standards@pfc.org. Anytime, any questions related to this one, to chain of custody, to SFM, to Renewable Energy Directive, and please help us and go to the link and comment on those standards. The chain of custody working group members, the task force members, all of them that are very committed and have developed these standards to make something useful and to add some value, are looking forward to receiving your comments. Thank you very much for being with us today. We stay in touch, and I would just wish you all a wonderful rest of the day. See you soon. Bye bye.